I think we'll get started. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. My name is Michelle Giroux. I'm the Executive Officer of Corporate Services with the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board. And I am very fortunate to be here and supported with a talented team from our planning department, Janet McDonald and Julie Anderson, who will provide some support to us on planning and mapping issues, and Nicole Guthrie from our board services team, who can speak a little bit about one, our operation of the meeting, and two, some of the finer points of zone boundaries. And technically we're supported by Mike Gabeau tonight. So thanks to all of them for being with us tonight, and thanks to you for spending this kind of cold, wet November evening with us. I'd like to acknowledge that this is Treaties Recognition Week, a week that the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board recognizes annually as an opportunity to learn more about treaty rights and relationships. And I'd like to acknowledge that we are meeting tonight and we are discussing electoral zone boundaries that are on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin people. We acknowledge the care and stewardship that they have brought to these lands. Let us be guided by their knowledge, and let us offer our thanks and appreciation for their hosting us on these lands. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about what we're going to do tonight. We have a fairly dense subject. We have created an electoral zone boundary toolkit and tried to break out this information as easily as or as clearly as we can. And lots of maps and some legislative information. We have compiled all of that as well into a narrated PowerPoint that we're going to show to you. It's fairly dense. It runs about 17 minutes, and then we're going to have an opportunity to ask questions. Nicole's going to explain to you how we'll manage the questions. And just before I hand over to Nicole, I'll just tell you a few things about ward boundaries generally. So every election year, the board has to do a process that's called the trustee distribution and determination process. And that's essentially where the board determines the number of trustees and the geographic areas that trustees represent. This year, the process is a little bit more complex because the City of Ottawa has updated their ward boundaries. And so school board electoral zones must be based on the municipal ward boundaries. And so we're required to take a look. Electoral zones can be made up of one or more municipal ward boundaries. And if we combine municipal wards, we have to combine only those that are beside each other. We have currently 12 electoral zones at the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board. And just to clarify that electoral zone boundaries are just areas of geographic representation for electoral purposes. They do not affect school attendance boundaries. So electoral zone boundaries do not have any impact on where your kids go to school. There's lots more to be said about electoral zone boundaries, but I'm going to leave that for the video presentation. Nicole, I'm going to hand things over to you to explain to us and the participants how they might go about participating in tonight's meeting.
Thank you so much, Michelle. So this evening, there will be a couple of ways for you to ask questions or provide your input. Those are found at the bottom of your screen, noted by the Q&A or chat. We will be monitoring the Q&A and the chat, and you can use either or tool as you wish to type your question or comment into the chat. After the presentation of the video, we will be working through the Q&A in the chat in real time, and we'll be bringing some of those questions into the space and responding to those appropriately. If you would like to ask a question verbally, we have an option as well for you to do so by raising your hand. I would ask that you do that at the point when the presentation is complete. We will acknowledge you and then we can identify and promote you as a panelist, and then you can unmute and ask your question accordingly. if you intend or would like to use that raise your hand option, please make sure that you are identified in the Zoom meeting by the name that is most recognizable to you, as it will be easier for us to call upon you and announce in the meeting your name and promote you accordingly.
Thanks very much, Nicole. Mike, we'll go over to you for the presentation. And I'll just say this, that this is a new approach for us. This is a recorded presentation and it's auto-recorded. And so we're testing out this kind of approach to the presentation. What is great about it is it allows the presentation to be used by other people who weren't able to attend tonight's meeting. And so we'll be interested in your feedback on that as well. Thank you. Mike?
Welcome and thank you for your interest in the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board Electoral Zone Boundary Review. We look forward to receiving your input on the proposed options. The purpose of this consultation is to collect feedback on 5 possible new trustee zone configurations. The deadline to submit feedback is Friday, November 12th. All feedback will be reviewed and help to inform the final recommendation report, which is scheduled to be presented to the Committee of the Whole meeting on December 7th. Before each municipal election, every Board of Trustees must determine the number of trustee positions on their board and distribute these positions across the board's area of jurisdiction. Please note that the electoral zone boundary review will not impact or affect school attendance boundaries, school closures, new school locations, and they are not a comment on the work of individual trustees. In February 2021, the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board presented its plan for the comprehensive review of electoral zone boundaries to align with the City of Ottawa's revised ward boundaries, in an effort to develop a trustee determination and distribution approach that will last for several municipal elections. Staff reviewed the expected growth of public school electors and developed a series of options for consideration. Comments and suggestions, these were made available through the district website on our consultation page. At a recent board meeting, the trustees suggested a 5th option be presented, highlighting an 11 trustee model. The consultation phase, which includes a virtual town hall, aims to provide stakeholders with an overview of the process, an opportunity to review the 5 options and provide input. In early December of 2021, staff will present findings to the board and trustees will determine a model that will be the basis for the trustee determination and distribution process in early 2022. The Province of Ontario, by Regulation 41200, requires the OCDSB to make recommendations to the Minister of Education on the number and geographic allocation of trustees for the 2022 election of trustees. A report containing these recommendations must be submitted to the Minister and others by April 3, 2022. Municipal ward boundaries establish the framework for determining electoral zone boundaries for school boards. An electoral zone is made up of 1 or more municipal wards and will include all the elementary and secondary schools in the geographic area. Currently, there are 12 trustee zones, with 1 trustee elected by public school electors living in the city ward or wards to represent the zone on the Board of Trustees. With the recent changes to the city's ward boundaries, the OCDSB must review its existing electoral zone boundaries to align the 12 electoral zones to the city's new 24-ward structure. There are a number of legislative provisions which govern the development of zone boundaries. Electoral zones must be based on the city's ward boundaries. Electoral zones can be comprised of 1 or more municipal wards, but the combined wards must be contiguous. That is to say that adjacent wards may be combined, but they cannot be severed or intersect municipal ward boundaries. Municipal wards cannot be divided. They must be wholly included inside an electoral zone. A review of electoral zones is generally undertaken with regard for the general principles of electoral representation, including the protection of communities of interest, recognition of present and future population trends, recognition of physical and/or geographic features as natural boundaries, the number of schools, and the electoral quotient, a percentage of the number of public school electors. City of Ottawa Ward Boundary Review. In 2020, the City of Ottawa conducted a comprehensive ward boundary review. The purpose of the review was to ensure effective representation and balance population numbers. A key goal of the review was to enable the city to establish boundaries for at least 3 future municipal elections. The last major review of Ottawa's ward boundaries occurred in 2004-2005, The City of Ottawa's population has grown significantly since the last ward boundary review, particularly in Barrhaven, Ward 3/Current Zone 3, where the city has permitted the expansion of residential communities. The population in Gloucester South Nepean, Ward 22/Current Zone 7, and Cumberland, Ward 19/Current Zone 8, has also increased, with numbers expected to grow in the coming years. In December of 2020, the City of Ottawa approved an increase in the number of electoral wards from 23 to 24 wards and made modifications to several other ward boundaries. A copy of the recommended boundaries final report is available on the City of Ottawa's website. On January 27, 2021, Council enacted Bylaw Number 2021-3, titled, A Bylaw of the City of Ottawa to Establish Ward Boundaries and Council Composition. On October 13, City Council approved ward names and numbers for the next Ottawa municipal election on Monday, October 24, 2022. Council renamed 6 existing wards to reflect geographical areas and community names, and established a name and number for 1 new ward. The new ward will be known as Ward 24, Barrhaven East. More details and updates on the city's Ward Boundary Review 2020 project can be accessed through the City of Ottawa website. Current OCDSB electoral zones. This table outlines the current trustee distribution and determination for the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board. Ideally, the electoral quotient, or EQ, should be 1.0, with a variance of not more than plus or minus 25%. The current zone configuration has some variances with respect to electoral quotient. Bay and College wards are on the low end of the electoral quotient with an EQ of 0.643 and 0.691 respectively, while Somerset-Kitchissippi has a high EQ of 1.28. A comparison of the preliminary models reveals that any improvement to the balance of representation necessitates 1 or 2 challenging changes. The first is the realignment of some traditionally combined municipal wards. The second is a potential reduction in the number of trustees. The OCDSB's current electoral zone boundaries have been in place since the 2018 election. This map shows the current 12 trustee zones with the city's new 24-ward structure superimposed on top. You can see that current zones 1, 3, 4, 7, 8, 10, 11 and 12 have significant line shifts, and the future planned development in these areas will necessitate some changes. A suburban portion of West Carleton, currently located in Trustee Zone 1, has shifted to become a part of Canada North. Changes to City Wards 3 and 22 and the creation of a new Ward 24 have impacted current Trustee Zones 3 and 7. In the urban core, the largest changes were made to current Trustee Zones 10 and 12 to improve voter parity. Key areas of change to the individual trustee zones are available on the consultation page of the district's website. Number of elected trustees. The OCDSB currently has 12 elected trustees. The number of trustees is established by a formula in the Education Act and Ontario Regulation 412/00. Based on the current data, the OCDSB cannot increase the number of trustees above 12. The board may reduce the number of elected trustees below the number provided for in the Education Act and Ontario Regulation 412/00, but not below the minimum number of 10 members. This can be done only by a resolution of the board. If a school board chooses to exercise this option, the resolution must be passed before March 31st of an election year. Most of the proposed models use a trustee determination of 12, with one focusing on an 11 trustee distribution model. While reducing the number of trustees is an option and may help to balance some of the challenges with the electoral quotient, there are a number of additional factors that would need to be examined should the board wish to explore this approach. These include amendments to the OCDSB bylaws and standing rules, voting, quorum, increases to trustee workload, and trustee honoraria. Understanding the electoral quotient. Before each municipal election, every board of trustees must establish the number of trustee positions on their board, determination, and the electoral boundaries for each position, distribution, across the board's geographic area. This process is known as trustee determination and distribution, or D&D. This process plays an important role in ensuring that representation on school boards is democratic and fair. It also allows trustee candidates to identify and select an electoral ward in which to run. Therefore, it is very important for school boards to make accurate calculations. The electoral zones are the distribution part of that report. The electoral population, the number of electors that support the public school system. is a key element for these calculations. Information on the number of electors is provided to the OCDSB by the Municipal Property Assessment Corporation, MPAC, in early January of each election year. This information is critical to the trustee determination and distribution process. MPAC has provided OCDSB staff with preliminary projections from March of 2021. The projections account for the total number of public school electors based on the total population of the city. These numbers required some redistribution and reassignment to spread the total public school electors over the city. New approved wards. The March 2021 MPAC data was used to develop a base data set and helped planning staff develop the preliminary models we will explore in this presentation. The electoral quotient, or the EQ, is one of the most important elements in determining the number and distribution of electoral zones. The electoral quotient represents the proportion of eligible public school supporters per trustee zone. Ideally, the electoral quotient should be 1.0, with a variance of not more than plus or minus 25%. The formula for calculating the EQ is A times B divided by C, where A equals the number of eligible public school supporters within each trustee zone, B equals the total number of trustees for the school board per the Education Act, and C equals the total number of eligible public school supporters in the City of Ottawa. Staff has calculated the electoral quotient for the preliminary models. 5 possible zone model configurations have been developed. They are modified status quo, urban core, suburban hubs, rural hub, and 11 trustees. It is important to note that the data used for our preliminary review was based on the data used by the City of Ottawa and from preliminary information received from MPAC. Also of note are some significant population increases and growth in the following areas. Ward 15, Kitchissippi, will see a population increase of over 12,000 by 2034 due to infill condominium developments in Kitchissippi. The population of Ward 4, Canada North, will increase by almost 17,000 due to the development of Canada North. Ward 6, Stittsville, will see a population increase of close to 28,000 due to the development of Stittsville and Fernbank. The population of Ward 3, Barrhaven West, will increase by 19,000 due to the development of Half Moon Bay and Barrhaven West. And Ward 14, Somerset, will increase by 8,500 due to infill condominium and public housing developments in the Hintonburg and Le Breton communities. Preliminary Model 1 modified status quo. This model reflects the existing electoral zone boundaries with minor modifications to meet the city's new ward structure. This option maintains 12 zones which closely resemble the current configuration. When reviewing this model, it is important to consider that significant growth is projected in modified Zone 3, particularly in Ward 9, Knoxdale-Merivale, due to the development in the Half Moon Bay and Barrhaven West areas, which will further increase the total electoral quotient by the 2034 election. The population projections for modified Zones 4 and 5, Bay and College, are relatively stable with no planned growth. The population of modified Zone 10, Kitchissippi-Somerset, will also increase significantly due to the anticipated infill condominium and public housing developments planned for Hintonburg, Le Breton, and Kitchissippi. This option has several wide variances in both the EQ from 1.31 to 0.63 and the number of schools per zone ranges from 16 to 7. Preliminary Model 2 Urban Core. This model builds on the status quo with some changes to further reduce the variances in the EQ. This model presents a balanced approach while maintaining some of the current ward pairings. In this model, Bay Ward remains independent with no major growth planned. Somerset-Kitchissippi continues to be paired, but will see significant population increases by the 2034 election owing to the anticipated infill condominium and public housing developments planned for Hintonburg, Le Breton, and Kitchissippi. Orleans and Cumberland are combined and can accommodate the future growth planned for the Orleans area. This model combines College/Knoxdale/Merivale. The electoral quotient for Bay Ward is 0.63, while the electoral quotient for Somerset-Kitchissippi is high at 1.29. The total schools per trustee zone in this model ranges from 7 to 16. Preliminary Model 3, Suburban Hubs. This model reflects the growth in different parts of the city and features changes to several traditional alignments. Canada North would be combined with West Carleton and can accommodate the planned future growth of the Canada North Ward. Canada South would be combined with the new Stittsville Ward and can accommodate the planned future growth of Stittsville Ward. This model proposes a large rural ward at the south, combining Rideau-Goulbourn and Osgoode, which has a lower electoral quotient but long-term growth potential. Bay Ward would be combined with Kitchissippi, while Somerset would be combined with Capital. College and Knoxdale-Maravale are combined, and Riverside South/Findlay Creek is relatively small to start, to allow for the significant growth planned for this area. Electoral quotients in the suburban hub configuration range from 0.44, as the Riverside South Findlay Creek ward would be a single ward trustee zone with a planned population increase of over 24,000 due to development in the area. At the high end in this model are the combined Orleans wards, which have an electoral quotient of 1.135. The population of the Orleans area is also anticipated to increase by the 2034 election. Preliminary Model for Rural Hub. This model changes several traditional alignments and creates a large rural hub. Noted on the map as Zone 3, the large mint green area at the bottom. This preliminary Zone 3 combines Orleans South Navan, Osgoode and Rideau-Jock wards. In this model, Kanata South is combined with Stittsville. Bay Ward is combined with Kitchissippi. Somerset is combined with Capital and College, and Knoxdale/Maravale are combined. In this model, the Riverside South and Findlay Creek pairing poses some challenges, with a low electoral quotient and total school count in the first electoral term. The anticipated future growth for the area would see those numbers increase by the 2034 election. The Bay/Kitchissippi pairing, already at the high end of the electoral quotient at 1.24, will also be impacted by future population growth in the Kitchissippi area. Preliminary Model 511 Trustees. This model envisions a reduction in the total number of trustees to 11 and combines multiple wards to more evenly distribute the electoral quotient. In this model, there are no one-ward zones. Canada North is combined with West Carleton and can accommodate the planned future growth of the Canada North ward. Bay Ward is combined with Kitchissippi. College and Knoxdale-Maravale are combined. Canada South is combined with Stittsville Ward, and Somerset is combined with Capital. The other notable grouping in this model is the combination of Wards 3, 21 and 24, which includes Barrhaven West, the Rideau-Jock and Barrhaven East. In this model, the electoral quotient in 2022 ranges from 1.24 at the highest and 0.69 at the lowest. The total number of schools ranges from 17 to 7. The Riverside South/Osgoode pairing is relatively small, but significant growth is planned for this area, and by the 2034 election its electoral quotient is projected to increase to 0.79. Engagement and next steps. Staff will gather all of the feedback received from the town hall and emails to the project email account, analyze the suggestions and submit a final report with recommendations to the board in early December. The final report will be posted on the website as well. The recommendation report is scheduled to be reviewed and debated at the Committee of the Whole meeting on December 7, 2021. This meeting will allow for delegations from the public and include trustee debate regarding the staff recommendation. The meeting will be live-streamed. The resolution will be finalized at the board meeting on December 14th. The OCDSB trustee determination and distribution process will be complete by the end of March 2022. Thank you for participating in this consultation process. Your input is invaluable and most appreciated. Email your questions and thoughts to electoralzoneboundary@ocdsb.ca.
So that was, as I promised, an awful lot of information and maybe read a little quickly, but lots to think about there. And we're certainly happy to open the floor to questions. Nicole, do you just want to recap again how people can submit their questions?
They can type those into the Q&A box at the bottom of their screen. They may also use the chat option at the bottom of the screen. Or if they would like to raise their hand and ask a question verbally, they can do that, and we will be queued and allow you to enter the space to do so.
That's great. Thanks very much. Just as we wait for questions to come in, so a few things just to highlight. When we look at our current zone boundaries, obviously, you know, what the video explains is the importance of representation by population. And so as we look to combine boundaries or create new electoral zone boundaries, we're really looking at electoral representation and wanting to see, you know, whether or not we can create scenarios where the number of electors per zone is comparable. And we also look at sort of communities of interest. We look at the natural geographic boundaries. We look at the growth projections. And of course, we look at the number of schools per zone. So those are some of the things we want to think about. And as we're combining, and I think we indicated this, we can only combine wards that are contiguous. We can't sever or divide any of the municipal wards. When we take a look at our current distribution, we know that we have some wards that are just naturally smaller than others and that don't necessarily align. A good example is Bay Ward. Bay Ward is a standalone ward. It's the only ward in the zone and it's smaller. It has a lower electoral quotient than, for example, its neighbor Kitchissippi-Somerset, which is quite a large ward. And so in looking at models, we've looked at some of those areas where there were traditionally issues and whether or not we could redistribute a little bit more evenly. I can't say that we found a perfect one, but we've come up with 5 different scenarios. No questions?
I'm seeing no questions in the space. I'll put one in the space and maybe we can have a little conversation or receive some input through the chat. Are there, or what should the board keep in mind as we make decisions about our ward review and the boundaries?
So definitely we want to take a look at the number of electors, right? The number of electors, and so that we get representation by population. And so do we have a pretty even distribution? And then, as I mentioned, we look at communities of interest, natural geographic boundaries, growth projections, number of schools per zone, those sorts of things. So I see in the chat, there's a question about what defines communities of interest. And it's not expressly defined anywhere, but a good example would be if we look at some of the models, in our current structure, Canada North and Canada South, which are 2 separate municipal wards, are combined into one electoral zone so that all of Canada is represented in the same by the same trustee. In some of the new models, we've looked at some different areas, some different possibilities. So for example, combining Canada North with West Carleton. And so what we start thinking about is, does that relationship, do the communities in Canada North and West Carleton have more in common? Do they have shared recreational facilities? Do they use the same kind of roadways? Do they maybe go to the same schools? Is there a connection between there? Or is it still a stronger community of interest between Canada North and Canada South? Janet, I don't know if there's anything you would add to that.
That's basically it. Sometimes a natural feature will divide a community, or a forced structure like the Queens or something might change communities of interest, or make it hard for a community to be cohesive, but sometimes it doesn't really matter. And I think given the fact that the Canada North and South, just as that example there, I think in more recent times, Canadas have been coming a little more together than maybe before they might have been divided by the Queensway.
So we have a couple of questions now in the Q&A section. This one reads, biggest concern is that some trustees, especially Barrhaven, will be responsible for too many schools. Therefore, the trustee cannot give as much attention to large population growth in schools. An example of this would be overcrowding.
Sorry, I was muted there. It's a great point, and one that we need to take a look at. So Barrhaven, as an area we know, has undergone a lot of growth. And in our current configuration, Barrhaven is combined with Knoxdale-Maryville. And so we need to take a look at that and say, you know, what are the population projections there? And should we reconsider that, particularly because there's been a ward boundary change in Barrhaven? And it's precisely that issue about how large is it that determines both representation by population, so electoral quotient, and that's the legislative thing we look at. But we'll also be watching for a number of schools to see if we can't bring that down a little bit in some way. And there are some models that do that in the models we proposed.
Another really good question in our Q&A. For Kitchissippi Somerset, why combine zones with Bay? Why not split the growing parts of Kitchissippi Somerset and increase the number of trustees?
So definitely possible. I think I should start by saying we clearly don't have a defined path forward yet. We have a few, 5 options for us to look at. So we know that Bay Ward is small relative to some of the other wards. And we know that Bay Ward doesn't have a lot of room for growth. So that number, that population number has been fairly consistent for many elections, and the potential for growth isn't great. So we knew going into the process that Bay was one of the areas that we wanted to look at and see, are there any combinations that make more sense? We also know that Kitchissippi Somerset is very large. And so when we looked at different models, we looked at would it make sense to combine Bay with Kitchissippi and then maybe align Somerset with a different part of the downtown core. And we've got a couple of models that look at different configurations there. And we're definitely looking for feedback. And that's a good example of where something like community of interest might make sense. Is there a stronger community of interest between Bay Ward and Somerset, or between or Bay Ward and Kitchissippi, or between Kitchissippi and Somerset? So what are some factors? What are the natural boundaries there? What are the issues of common concern, and what does it look like when we look at the population distribution?
So another question in the Q&A. I appreciate that that was a lot of information in a short amount of time. That is definitely true. And a lot of growth is definitely anticipated in Canada North as well as Canada South. So instead of combining, why not split? I think we need more trustees, not bigger wards or zones.
So great question. There is a provincial formula around the number of trustees that you can have. And it is historically rooted in population. For about, and I'm going by memory now, so I hope I get this right. For about the last 3 municipal elections, there's actually been a provincial cap on the number of trustees established by regulation. And so we actually can't go higher than 12. And I don't think, although Nicole, I'm looking to you to see if you can confirm, that cap has been lifted yet. No, and so that's not to say that we couldn't appeal to the province, but it's not exclusively within the school board's jurisdiction to make that decision. While we wait for other questions, I want, oh.
Here we go. So with respect to Bay Ward, there will still be 7 light rail stations. So this makes Bay Ward ripe for heavy intensification and growth. This was recently identified in Ottawa's official plan, just approved last week.
And so when we do the zone boundaries, and I'll invite Jen or Julie to add any comment about the city's official plan. When we look at this, we have to look at the population forecast that the city has used for the municipal wards. And I have to pull them up, but I don't know, Janet, are you able to speak to what the growth projection is for Bay Ward? And then I guess the other thing I will say is, aside from straight population, of course, and straight density, we're looking for population that relates in large part to school-age children in terms of its impact on schools, although that's not the determinant for electoral zone calculations. So Janet, over to you.
Yes, Bay Ward is anticipated from the current 2022 projection to 2034, around 6,000, 7,000 growth in that ward alone. Yes, there are a lot of stations throughout there and it's pretty dense, but there's also a certain amount of infill. But then part of the area that's kind of the leg that goes up towards Canada along the river, and that a lot of that's NCC, so that's not developable land, although it looks like it has a mass that could have a lot of potential for development unless there's some major changes. And I mean, the official plan is underway right now and they haven't, as far as I know, identified anything in that area. It still should be maintained as green space. And as I say, there's the NCC lands pretty much to the western part of that boot of a shape of a zone. That's all I have.
Great.
Happy to open any other questions, or also wonder if it would be helpful for people if we did a walkthrough of the 5 models. Mike, can you put model 1 up on the screen? Sorry about that. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to navigate 2 screens here as we go through. So here. So in this model, model 1 is called a modified version of the status quo. So it will look to you very similar to what is currently in place. Where we see the biggest changes is the combination of Orleans and Cumberland, which accommodates the future growth for the Orleans area. And we see a big change affecting Barrhaven and the College Knoxdale-Merivale area. So currently College Ward or zone in our case is standalone. And in this model, it would be combined with Knoxdale-Merivale. So it actually creates an electoral zone that is a little bit more of the traditional City of Nepean center core area. Don't know, I'll pause there and see if there are any questions about modified model 1.
Sorry, Mike is going to put the model 1 map on the screen. We were just showing zone 1. There we go.
All right, so you see that I'm trying to see the colors there. You see that area in the center that looks a little bit different. So a comment there that the electoral quotient is already too high. and may very well be. These are some of the challenges when we take a look. It's high, but it doesn't exceed the threshold there. It's not as large as some of the other ones. So you'll see that, like all models, this solves some, but not all problems. We'll maybe move to model 2, which is what we've called the urban core model. So this model tries to capture growth in different areas and makes several changes in alignment. So this is one of the models where we've combined Kanata North with West Carleton March. And that sort of is intended to get at the future growth of Kanata North. Kanata South in this model is combined with Stittsville and acknowledges the amount of growth that's happening in the Stittsville community. At the south end here, we have a very large ward combining Rideau Jock and Osgood. So you'll see when we have this combination, we have a much lower electoral quotient in that rural ward, but we do see long-term growth potential there, and so it will even out over time. In this particular model, Bay Ward is combined with Kitchissippi, and Somerset is combined with Capital. College and Knoxdale Marivelle are combined, and Riverside South and Findlay Creek, that area is left independent. It's relatively small, but we know that there's significant growth planned in that area. So you'll see that when you look at the electoral quotients, there are some changes here. I think we still end up, as I said, with that one very low electoral quotient, but the rest of them get a little bit closer to the bar, with the one exception of the Cumberland Innis Orleans. So that's the challenge there. I'll pause there to see if there are any questions specific to that one, especially for zone 3. Not no specific questions. We'll move on to model 4. And so, I'm sorry, did I just jump a model, Nicole? Nope. Okay, we'll move on to model 4, the problem with too many screens.
Sorry.
This model changes several traditional alignments and creates a large rural hub by combining Osgood, Rideau Jock, and Cumberland. So a big area. Kanata South, again, in this model, combined with Stittsville. Bay Ward is combined with Kitchissippi. Somerset combined with Capital. And College and Knoxdale Marivelle are combined. So when you look at the electoral quotients here, I'm sorry. Yeah, you look at that, you see that distribution again, that 0.44 up to 1.24, I think is the highest. So we do bring the largest one down a little bit, which is nice, but we still end up with that really small ward with high growth potential. So the next piece, and there's a question about this, 11 trustees. So this model envisions a restructuring in the total number of trustees to 11. And so we see a change in the electoral quotients here quite a bit, and quite a bit of range in the number of schools. So Kanata North combined with West Carleton, Bay Ward combined with Kitchissippi, College and Knoxdale Marivelle combined, Kanata South with Stittsville, Somerset with Capital, Riverside South with Osgood, and most of the other stables. So there was a question about why did the board ask us to look at 11? And the thinking was that there may be some models where just the distribution of population works better with fewer than 12. So we might end up with a grouping of 3 zones or three wards in a zone rather than one standalone zone. We looked at a few models with 11. We didn't find any that completely eliminated the issue. And there are some other issues with moving to 11 trustees that we've not yet really investigated, but obviously there are impacts on other things, and potentially could increase the number of schools per trustee. I don't know if there are other questions or considerations people are looking for. Model 5 has a So Model 5 has a high population with a large number of schools. Good feedback. Thank you. What about Model 3? Did I skip Model 3?
I think you did, yeah, Michelle.
Oh, I'm sorry. Again, the too many screens. Let me go back. So Model 3 is the Suburban Hub model. And so in this model, Canada North again with West Carleton March, Canada South with Stittsville, and then the Rideau, Jock, and Osgood. And that's, again, the one with a low electoral quotient. Bay Ward and Kitchissippi, Somerset with Capital, and the combination of College and Knoxdale Maribel in here. And again, that Riverside South Findlay Creek area, independent and relatively small, but with significant growth. So a comment there that the needs of Bay Ward differ from Kitchissippi. Decreasing the number of trustees is not a good idea, so that's good feedback. And we don't have to have questions in the chat or Q&A. We also will just take feedback, ideas if you have a preferred model. And so the question is, how would students in Bay Ward benefit? And the trustee distribution and determination process is formulated on electoral criteria and formula and calculations. It doesn't actually get to considerations about students or teaching or learning, although we definitely want to think about how students are affected. And we think about that in the context of what is the distribution of work for trustees by electoral population and by number of schools. We're so comment there that housing is a social determinant of health and education. That's absolutely true. And, you know, a consideration in terms of some of those other things that we look at, communities of interest, natural boundaries, growth projections, et cetera. And certainly housing has, and the type of housing stock has a big impact on growth and student populations.
Michelle, if I may add also, there's some areas, particularly the inner city areas, where some of the growth is a high density, very intensive growth down towards the river and things like that. And often people think that there's a lot of students and families that come out of those types of dwelling units, but we don't always yield huge numbers of students. So often there's a thought that as soon as there's big buildings being built, that there's going to be an influx of a lot of students. A, first of all, it takes a long time for these to be built. B, it takes a little while for them to be filled up. And then depending on the type of units, often they're studio 1, 2 bedroom, very few 3-bedroom type units, which are probably more family oriented type units. It's the lower density, more ground oriented units where we seem to get a lot of yields. This isn't 100% across the board, but this is definitely a trend, and it's not just in Ottawa, it's across the province in different areas. Just as a bit of thought.
That's good. Thank you, Janet. So we'll talk a little bit about a comment there about urban planners will tell you we need a cultural change. Young families will be living in high rises, and that absolutely may be, you know, a trend we see going forward. I think if we think about today versus this work 20 years ago, we already see some of that. I think, you know, if we think about Janet's comments, it's about the timing of that and what we're planning for. And so when we look at the zone boundaries, we're planning for this election and we think the next few elections, but we do have the opportunity to review ward boundaries through the trustee distribution and determination process at every election. And as an example, in the last municipal election, we did make a change to Zone 11, combining River Ward and Gloucester Southgate into one zone. So there are interim changes. This is just the most substantive change that we're looking at that's required because of the municipal ward boundary changes.
We have a comment in our Q&A that Model 4 seems to allow for growth in the future as the EQ is within the scale.
That's good feedback. Thank you. We're happy to stay and answer questions and also understand that we've put out a lot of information and people may not have additional questions at this time. I want to tell you that we do hope to bring the report forward to the Board of Trustees with a recommendation in December. And so that means our time for feedback is until November the 12th. And you can email that feedback. The information was on the screen, and I think it was in the email that was sent to you. But Nicole, if you can just confirm the email address.
The email address is electoralzoneBoundary@ocdsb.ca. I will let you know that we will be posting the video in YouTube, and that can be shared, and we will be doing some sharing of that over the course of the next week. We will also be sharing a small Google survey within the YouTube site that you can provide feedback to. And as a result of participating in the session this evening, you will receive a little mini survey from Zoom with a few questions about preferences, and any comments can also be added to that survey as well.
Perfect. Great. Thank you. So there's a comment in a question in the chat about whether we've been in discussion with municipal city planners to drill down on the assumptions behind the official plan and the intersectionality with schools, recreation, and transit. So we are fortunate to be joined by our planning staff here, and they are in regular contact with the city. And in terms of the preparing of the zone boundaries, we worked quite a bit with the information that came from the city's ward boundary review committee. So they had established population projections that came from the city's planning department. And Janet can speak a little bit to the nature of the ongoing relationship that our planners have with city planning staff.
Yes, Michelle's correct. We have been working closely with the ward boundary review, information that's come in, all the data and things like that, but also on a regular ongoing basis, we are circulated all city circulations with respect to any development, whether it be subdivision, site plan, any sort of development, official plan amendment, anything like that. We're in conjunction, we work in conjunction with the municipal planners, and we provide comment in respect to developments. If there's a school site potentially that we need on a particular subdivision that's going to be developed, many, many years in advance. We are looking at all this information, and it's an ongoing process, and we work in concert with them all the time. And they hear us and we hear them, and it's a work in process, and it's a long process, but it works out well. Thank you.
All right, so if there aren't any more questions this evening, as I said, we're happy to receive your feedback via email or follow-up, and we will be preparing a report. When we have the report ready to go to the Committee of the Whole for discussion, we will make sure that we distribute it via email to everyone who was registered for this webinar. I believe, Nicole, we have all those email addresses. So we'll make sure you get that copy. And if you haven't had a chance to look carefully at the toolkit, please go ahead and do so. We will be posting the video that we used tonight on the district website with the toolkit and other information and resources. So it is available there if folks would like to go through it in any more detail. This is an important topic in terms of, defining boundaries. It's critical to the electoral process. It's a topic that's near and dear to my heart. Janet and I were joking. We have done work on electoral zone boundaries in different parts of the city for more than 30 years together. And I appreciate that you folks took your time this evening to come and join us in this presentation and to share your thoughts, and welcome any additional thoughts you might have, and look forward to sharing a report with you. So thank you very much. And thanks to Janet and Julie and Nicole and Mike for all of their help this evening.